I'm George Lawson, Director of Ames Public Library, and I'm with Farwell Brown today in the exhibit hall of the Octagon amid the displays of an exhibit called Faces of Our Founders, focusing on founding families and individuals of Ames. Farwell's here to talk about two of the key contributors to our community in the early years, Captain W.M. Greeley and Parley Sheldon. Two very similar but yet very different individuals. Farwell?
Right. Yes, I'm happy to talk about these two gentlemen. They were distinguished for their service to our city in their day. They were men who had many things in common. They were men who had a number of differences, which makes it interesting. They were both bankers in their prime years in Ames. I want to tell more about them than that, but let me get them located. They were Parley Sheldon. He was the owner and the president of the Story County Bank. It was located where the gas office is today, down here on the corner of Douglas and Main Street.
That'd be the northeast corner.
Northeast corner. And Captain Greeley's bank, which was known as the Union National Bank originally, was on the corner across the street. In other words, the northwest corner.
And that building's still there.
That building's still there. And these gentlemen came to Ames very early in the life of our city. I'm going to tell a little story because it illustrates how these men doesn't quite tell the whole story, but it's part of what I have in mind in demonstrating that their battleground was politics and banking.
Well, that's always good for an argument, isn't it?
Because one was a Democrat and the other one was a Republican, and they were both very active in their parties. And of course, but their common ground was Ames, and the many things that we try to bring out today about what they did is still evident in our city. But let me digress for a minute. In 1915, that's right into the prime years of both of these men, the Ames Women's Club was organized. And the first project, one of the first projects that they apparently adopted, was they wanted to put in a drinking fountain down on Main Street.
Quite an public improvement.
Yeah. And Mrs. Frank Linebaugh, who was the wife of the manager of the gas company at that time, was either on the committee or chairman of the committee to raise $50 to put that drinking fountain on Main Street. I might explain that there had been a town pump down there in front of the bank. It was taken out in 1908 because Professor Meeker had tested the water and found it contaminated, or polluted, I guess is a better word. And so they'd taken the handle off. Well, there'd been no place where the public could get a drink of water. Well, she proposed, and the committee proposed, that they sell cookies to raise the $50, and so she asked her husband if they couldn't sell the cookies in the gas company office. And he got to figuring, cookies in those days sold for about 10 cents a dozen. And
that's a lot of cookies.
Right, he used his pencil, and it figured out something like 500 dozen cookies. And he thought, well, they'd be selling cookies all summer down there in the gas office. So he said, let me think about this.
Sure.
So the next morning, he, without saying much to her about what he was going to do, he goes down to the Union National Bank, goes in to see Captain Greeley. And he goes up into the counter there where his desk was, and Captain Greeley came over, and he said, Captain, the Women's Club want to put in a drinking fountain down here. And he said, I think, and I told my wife I'd help him figure out how to raise money. And I think the best way to do that is to have your two banks, the Sheldon's Bank over on the other corner, and you each pay $25. It's going to cost $50. Well, Captain Greeley said, where are you going to put it? Where do you think that you're going to? Well, this is part of Frank Linebaugh's strategy. He said, they're talking about putting it over there on the corner across the street.
Yeah.
And he pointed out the window to over on the corner.
The competitor's bank.
Yeah.
Sheldon's bank. Yeah.
And Captain Greeley pulled out his drawer and picked up his checkbook, and he started to write, and he says, you leave that old goat alone. He says, here's your $50, and you put it on this corner. And that's how it happened. The first drinking fountain was put on the Union National Bank corner, and it was there for years. Many people will remember that. Well, Captain Greeley was born in New York in 1838 on a farm, New York State, upstate New York, and Orleans County, if you want to know where it was. And Parley Sheldon was born about 6 years later, 1844, in Ohio, also on a farm. They were both in the Civil War from 1861 to 65. And after the Civil War, they were both married before they came out to Iowa, although I think Captain Greeley was married a couple of years later than Sheldon was. And Captain Greeley married Mary Victoria Young was her name, and they were both school teachers. He'd been a schoolmaster, and he brought her out to Iowa and to Ames in 1866. Now, the first thing that Captain Greeley did was...
That's 2 years after the incorporation?
Yeah, well, 2 years after the town was laid out.
Right.
Just a year after the town was incorporated. Well, it wasn't incorporated until 1870, but just
the
a year after the plat was recorded.
Okay.
Right? But Parley Sheldon didn't arrive in Ames until 1874, and by this time he had one son, a little boy who was 2 years old by this time. I said Captain Greeley bought a farm, first thing he did. And that farm, incidentally, was located right south of the campus of the Iowa Agricultural College. And today the Green Hills and the Gateway Motel and the west half of the interchange on Highway 30 are on what was the Greeley farm.
Okay.
In passing, he got 200 acres of land there for $2,000 at $10 an acre, which is interesting.
That's about 1 acre now.
Yeah, right. But,
or half an acre.
Yeah, a little bit later, Parley Sheldon arrives, and he bought a farm, and his farm was located immediately south of about half a mile south of the corner of Lincoln Way and Duff Avenue today. I think today on his farm you'll find that country kitchen that was just built down there, and some of those developments that tell you where part of his land was. But there were 300 acres that he got, and he paid about $20 an acre for it at that time, and that was in 1875 when he bought it. He'd been here a year by that time. Well, they both farmed for a little while, and in 1876, 2 years after Sheldon arrived, Greeley and his wife moved into Ames, and they built the houses right across from where the Mary Greeley Hospital is today, on the corner of 12th and Douglas, on the southwest corner of that corner.
Okay.
Right, you got it? Of course, that's all parking lot today.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, in 1882, Captain Greeley and his wife built the house that's over here now, kitty corner from where we are. That's now the Ames Funeral Home.
Now, who built that?
Captain Greeley.
Captain Greeley.
That was their home.
And that's the very house, the structure that's the Ames Funeral Home now?
That's right.
Okay.
And Parley Sheldon moved to town that year, and at this point, Captain Greeley had entered the banking business. I might say that before he was a banker, he served a very short time as a treasurer for the Iowa Agricultural College. He did engage in some school teaching too, which he had done back in New York, but this was not to be his permanent interest. He joined a man by the name of Lucas, and there was another man whose name is gone from me right now, in a sort of a private banking operation that was conducted in the back of one of the stores down here near the corner of Douglas and Main Street. But in 1881 or 2, about the same time that he built the house that we talked about, he incorporated the first corporate bank in Ames and gave it the name the Union National Bank. And they say it was the name of the Union Army was still uppermost in his mind, and perhaps that's where he got the name Union.
Was it his money?
Yes,
to make the capitalization?
When he came, his capital was not very great, but he had $3,200 that he'd saved from his pay, and that was the beginning of his capital. And he was a frugal man, and he was a good investor, as we'll find out. Well, Parley Sheldon engaged in livestock buying and selling for a little while, and then he bought the Story County Bank. It was a private bank, and across the street. It's located right across from Greeley's Bank, and that was in 1890. So from that time on, they were banking competitors. And as I think I don't know whether I indicated it yet or not, but Parley was a very active Democrat.
Okay.
All these years. And Captain Greeley was an ardent Republican. So you begin to see where they might have had their...
And their banks are across the street from each other.
From each other,
yeah.
right. And they were never described as being unfriendly, but at the same time, there were people who indicated they heard some pretty ardent arguments going on in either Captain Greeley's office or Parley Sheldon's office when both men were present. Well, anyway, we go on. Captain Greeley served in the state legislature 2 terms. I think it was about 1888, 89, something like that. About that time, he served a term or 2 as mayor of our city. Parley Sheldon, 1884, his interest in local politics comes to the surface, and he was elected mayor.
Okay.
Now, Parley Sheldon became known as the perennial mayor of Ames.
How many terms did he have?
Well, he served 18 terms, I think.
Okay.
If I got that right. Anyway, over a period of 32 years.
I think that's right.
He for 18.
That's the number I've seen.
18 years anyway. Put it that way. Some of those are 1 year.
18
terms.
years over
32
years. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so he earned that title of perennial mayor of Ames. Well, Captain Greeley, I think he paid his greatest attention to his banking interests. Parley Sheldon, a little different interest area. He became interested in the good roads development in the state. He became an ardent supporter of the good roads work in Iowa and nationally. And he was elected the secretary of the National Good Roads Association, a big supporter of the Highway Commission when it came into being in 1904.
It's hard to imagine how important an issue that would have been back then, because we're used to fine highways and good municipal roads, but they were in the mud back then, weren't they?
That's right. And we had people in those days who were advocates of good roads, dirt roads. As a matter of fact, so when the paving...
the superiority of dirt roads, you heard arguments for that?
Right. Well, yes, they were quiet, and, and if they were well maintained, they were the best. But the Parley Sheldon was one of those who helped organize the Ames and College Railroad in 1892.
Now, this is what was called the Dinkey?
It was called the Dinkey, that's right. And it operated until 1907 when the Fort Dodge Des Moines Southern purchased the road. It used to run right down 5th Street by the corner where we are right now.
Okay.
And they say that he used to run out when he wanted a little break from his bank. He'd go out and hop on the Dinkey and take the controls and give it... operate it out to the campus and back for a run.
I guess you can do that when it's your railroad.
Yeah, so he was one of the prime movers in that. But Captain, going back to Greeley for a moment, he served on the school board. He was treasurer of the school board, and that brings up an area where the 2 men were competitors occasionally. They competed for the job as treasurer. And in 1898...
Why would anybody want to compete to be treasurer of the school board?
I'll tell you, there was a story on the front page of the Intelligencer in March of 1898.
This is the early Ames paper, the Ames Intelligencer.
Right, yeah, Ames publication. And it said that Parley Sheldon had been elected the day before to the position of treasurer of the Ames School Board. And it said that the meeting had to go a little bit late the evening before because they had to cast not one, but a number of ballots before they could settle the issue between Captain Greeley and Parley Sheldon.
What was the honor?
Well, they said that it was a spirited debate that went on in that meeting. Said that after it was over with, the 2 men shook hands and everybody was friendly and happy about it. But it wasn't the battle really wasn't between the two gentlemen, the two personalities. The question was which bank would be the depository for the funds of the school board.
I guess some things never change.
Right. So anyway, that's just a little story about the competition, the two men. But I go back, they were basically very friendly and cooperative. Captain Greeley and his wife, and I want to mention Mary Greeley, she was on the library board. Now you're familiar with her.
Oh, I think I've heard the name once or twice. She and her husband donated the lots for the public library.
For the first unit of 1904, about was it
1904.
Yeah.
That's the dedication. Right.
Mrs. Greeley, Mary Greeley, had been on the library board, was on the library board from its inception until her death in 1914. So it was because of her that those lots were given to the library. Captain Greeley was inclined to be, I believe anyway, sort of quiet and involved in the things he did, but he did a number of things I think we don't even know about for the benefit of the town. And his wife died next to the last day of December in 1914. And a few months later, in 1915, Captain Greeley announced that he was going to give the city the funds to build, or he was going to build and give to the city a hospital in memory of his wife, Mary Greeley. And as you know, this did come about, and in December the contract was given to a Des Moines firm. And in 1916, in September, the Mary Greeley Hospital was dedicated.
Now, is any of that building still standing?
Yes.
Is that what faces west on Douglas?
That's right.
Is that the part that was the original entrance?
The original part.
I think there's a loading dock there if you want to.
That's right.
To look.
Right opposite the parking
kind
lot.
of a brown. It's brown brick, right?
That's right.
Okay.
And Captain Greeley had brought out a consultant from Chicago, and in consultation with the local doctors of that day, they had selected that site. And the reason that they announced for selecting the site was it provided room for expansion, which has proved to be has occurred.
That's
see.
Oh, it's
but
grown topsy.
That's right. Well, when it was dedicated, he spoke. And at the close of his remarks, he said it gave him great satisfaction to be able to provide something that would benefit not only those of his day, but those who would live here in the future. And so there we have it, the Mary Greeley Hospital. It was Captain Greeley's contribution to our city. That's still a very outstanding facility that we have.
Some of our founders had a strong streak of philanthropy.
That's right. Well, let's go now, because Parley Sheldon, before I go to Parley Sheldon, though,
sure.
See, this was in 1915 and 16 in September.
Okay.
And the following year, in 1917, I want to get the exact date if I can, on February 22nd, 1917, Captain Greeley himself died, passed away in the night when he was living right over here in the house that we referred to. And so now we have Parley Sheldon, who would live on to a bit of an older age. He was the younger, of course, of the two.
6 years younger.
6 years younger.
Yeah.
And he lived until he was 87 and died in 1932. Well, in 1917, this is an end of an era that both Parley Sheldon and Captain Greeley had been very active in. It was during the time that I've told what Greeley did, but I did not say that he also built the Masonic building in 1915 and 16, where we are.
Now that's
right here.
That's where we are right now during this conversation. That's now the Octagon building.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Captain Greeley and Parley Sheldon had been in conversation for several years. I think it goes back to 1913, about the need for a city hall and a hotel and better public facilities.
Sounds familiar.
Right, that's right. And of course the commercial club, which is the forerunner of today's what do they call
Chamber
it?
of Commerce. Right.
Was involved in it, and as a result of all of their discussions, a number of very significant things had happened. In 1915, I've already mentioned things that happened with the hospital and things
Right.
that related to Greeley. Parley Sheldon was mayor again. See this? He was mayor from 1913 to 1916. And during that strategic time, we built a new city hall.
That's the public safety building
What
now.
today is the police station
Yeah.
down there. See?
Kellogg and
And we're now replacing it for
Fifth.
good with a new city hall down further west. Well, Captain Greeley had proposed that he would join in building a part of this, and to carry out his end of the deal, he built the Masonic building.
okay, at the other corner of the
That's
block.
right.
Yeah.
And he brought the Masonic Lodge into it and gave them a 99-year lease, and that was the third floor of the building. It otherwise would have been a two-story building. Parley Sheldon, by this time, he has served as mayor. I want to mention some very interesting things he did. It was while he was mayor in 1894 they first discussed the idea of a municipal light plant. He wasn't mayor when they built it. It was the year after he was mayor they actually built the first city light plant, the city-owned light plant. But in 1909 they were talking about selling that to private industry.
That's a familiar
You've
topic
heard,
too.
You've heard that
yes.
one too. Well,
Uh-huh.
Again, about this time, Sheldon was mayor again, see. And he was very much opposed to that, and he said he was opposed to selling it, but there were a lot of people that seemed to think that was the thing to do. So they were putting it to a referendum. It was coming up to a vote, and the decision had been made to approve the sale at $40,000 to one of the utility companies. Parley Sheldon, of course, was very opposed to this, and a few days before the vote, he came in with a certified check for $50,000 and put it on the desk over at the city hall, the town hall where the town fathers met, and said, yeah, I will pay $10,000 more and keep that in Ames. As a result, the vote was turned down, and Ames still had the city hall. So he was credited with saving the light plant in 1909.
That's putting your money behind your convictions, isn't it?
That's right.
$50,000 was no small change.
I haven't been watching. I'm not aware of how fast time has gone here, but I'd like to tell one more story that relates to that too, and that is that it was along in 1913 when they were talking about the City Hall again, 1912 and 13, I should say. The light plant issue came up again, but this time it wasn't to sell it. It was to build a new one and relocate it. There were factions in town that said they wanted it built over on Squaw Creek, near this, where 6th Street crosses Squaw Creek.
Okay.
And there were two
in the Brookside Park area.
Right where Brookside Park is today.
Uh-huh.
And so that was put to a vote. That was in 1912 and 13 when that issue was hot. And Parley Sheldon was mayor again, see, when this happened. And he was opposed to relocating it. He was in favor of improving it right where it was down at the end of
where it is today.
Where it is today.
Yeah.
Well, there was a referendum, and the vote was whether or not to put it by Squaw Creek or put it down on the south side of Lincoln Way, just west of the C&NW tracks, about where that Lincoln Shopping Center is today. And the vote came out rather decisively to relocate it and build a new plant down on Squaw Creek. Well, keep in mind, Sheldon was mayor.
Okay.
And he was still opposed to it.
Sure.
And about this time,
Now they voted to move it.
the city people voted to move it. Yeah,
Okay.
the voters of Ames. But he still held out, and he instead of somehow or other it didn't come onto the agenda to act on that vote right away. And he was advised, the council was advised by Paisley, the city attorney, that
Paisley, now there's another Ames name,
right,
yeah.
early attorney, that litigation might be invited if they didn't carry through on this. Well, Parley Sheldon bided his time until the sentiment was swinging toward his point of view. And believe it or not, they voted in the city council with his deciding vote. He broke the tie vote to spend their money to improve the existing light plant, and they never built the new light plant. And within 2 or 3 years, nobody questioned it, and nobody ever caused any trouble. And so that sort of demonstrates the way that Parley Sheldon,
the power of the agenda,
how he operated. He worked on public opinion. I want to explain that in the meantime, until it was on his side.
Swung it around.
Right. Well, one other thing that he did in 1914, there was a move to part of some of the people in the 4th Ward, and I'm going to move on to something of a conclusion here.
Okay, now the 4th Ward, that's out west side of town.
Right. And I have in my hand the front page story dated October 22nd, 1914, threatened to incorporate the town of West Ames. See? And remember...
Now this is part of Ames.
Part of Ames, that's right.
And they're wanting to have their own town?
Have their own town.
Okay.
Well, that one blew over rather rapidly because there were some prominent people out there that were involved in it, and they immediately explained that no, they wouldn't support that kind of a move. What they were disgruntled about then was the location of the interurban depot on the south side of the CNNW tracks there, just on the west side.
And that's now what's known as the hub?
Well, no, I'm talking about the Fort Dodge, Des Moines, and Southern.
The interurban.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Today, the Iowa State University Credit Union is located where it was built in about 14 and 15.
And this is the railroad service to Des Moines?
Right.
Okay.
The electric line. Well, that was one of their main beefs, and it had to do with that more than anything else in the streetcar schedule. Well, in 1916, that issue came up again. He was mayor until the end of the term in 16. This time it was more serious, and they actually proceeded to go to court, and the city was served with notice of the intent to request a partition of certain areas out there known as the 4th Ward to separate the town into 2 towns, and they would have their separate corporation. Now, Captain Greeley, or Parley Sheldon rather, bided his time a little bit on this, and he let them go to the point where they were amending their petition and proceeding to the court hearing. And I don't know exactly the procedures and the timing, but he asked for a public meeting out there. It was held in the Champlin building. This was in 1917.
Now that's where People's Drug is in Campus Town?
Is today.
That's still the same Champlin building.
Right. And actually his term had expired when this meeting was held, but he was the main wheel in it, and I think it was Professor Meeker, it was somebody from the school board anyway, went with him, and they had this public meeting in which they discussed all of the complaints. Now the complaint then was paving.
Back to roads again.
Back to roads again.
Okay.
And of course, they had voted in December 1915 to pave 8 miles of downtown streets.
But not West Ames.
But nothing in West Ames. And this is what caused the rub. See?
Okay.
So he said, I want to ask them, after they'd done all their talking and griping, Captain Greeley said, well, what are you going to do about police power? What are you going to do about fire protection? And then I want to know, he said, out here, you only have a house or 2 in every square block now in these streets south of Lincoln Way. And the assessments would be rather high if we go to pave streets out here.
They finance street improvements just like they do today. The property owners along the route.
And he pointed out that downtown it was already developed. Well, he convinced them rather rapidly, and in that one, the wind was out of that one, see.
So he said, if he'd have been at Fort Sumter, we might not have had the Civil War.
We might have not had the Civil War. But Captain Greeley, I give him credit for that. But then my last thing to tell about Captain Greeley, or Parley Sheldon, I'm talking about Sheldon now entirely. In 1923, the Iowa Highway Commission, remember his interest in highways, good roads. The state legislature realized the public of the state of Iowa was now sold on the idea of a highway commission and better roads. And they were discussing locating and establishing a permanent location. It had been on the college campus, you may recall, until that time. And
the Highway Commission?
The Highway Commission was on the campus, and Dean Marston Dean Curtis had been the official commissioners for a period, but by this time we had a full commission, more of a commission, and they were going to establish a headquarters. Well, Parley Sheldon, right in his own hands, in his own right, went out and signed up about 160 people in Ames, including many of the faculty in engineering, practically everybody that worked for the Little Highway Commission at that point, practically all the business houses, and he raised $16,500, and he bought 5 acres of land down here on the south side of Lincoln Way, where the DOT is today.
Okay.
And he told them to the legislature, I don't know how this transaction occurred, but he was a good man, incidentally, in getting his message across, that if they would locate it in Ames, the site would be provided.
An act of magnanimity that
right.
that would pay itself back.
That's right.
Okay.
And so I have in my hand, dated September 1, 1923, the deed is signed by Parley Sheldon to the 5 acres on which the original Highway Commission building, which still stands down there as part of a larger complex today, deeding that to the state of Iowa for the purposes of providing a site for the headquarters of the Iowa Department or Highway Commission.
So Sheldon rounded up the subscribers to purchase this land to offer as bait to the legislature to locate the DOT here.
That's right. And
Okay.
I have here the list. It's attached to that deed. It's on record in Nevada of 166 names. I believe it's 166. It includes practically every businessman on Main Street.
Yeah.
It includes a substantial contribution by the Chicago Northwestern, incidentally, in here, the banks of Ames, and as they say, the business houses. And who do you think is the largest single contributor to that $16,500? Well, Parley Sheldon is. And he contributed $1,000 himself, which is the largest.
And I'll start it off with a contribution of $1,000. You can hear him
That's
say.
right.
Sure.
Well, now those are my remarks. And these two gentlemen that I've talked about, we've talked about, I've wanted to tell you how they have done in a different way, in different ways, did so much for the city of Ames. See, these distinguished men who earlier in our comments, I think I said, their battleground was banking and politics. But their common ground was their interest in Ames. And today we have the Mary Greeley Hospital, we have the Highway Commission, and we have other evidences of
The Sheldon Munn Hotel?
Sheldon Munn Hotel.
Sure.
I didn't mention that. I forgot to do that.
Well, there's a lot.
He came on and he put the first, he and H. Munn together built the Sheldon Munn. That had been talked about ever since 1902, and he finally took the what do you call it, the initiative, and together with Mr. Munn, they built the magnificent Sheldon Munn, which was the social center for a number of years for our city. Well, those are the things that I want to tell about these two gentlemen.
Well, thanks, Farwell. That's quite a bit of information about Captain Greeley and Parley Sheldon. Sure appreciate it.